Welcome to Stars Launch Pod, where we chat with innovators who are overcoming challenges, pushing boundaries, and collaborating to make space more accessible and sustainable for humanity, one launch at a time.
It's one small step for man.
Here's your host, Susan Wise.
Welcome to Stars Launch Pod, space technology and research sciences, brought to you by starsciences.org, where we connect, collaborate, and accelerate. I'm your host, Susan Wise. And joining us is Tejpaul Bhatia, space investor, executive, and entrepreneur, former CEO of Axiom Space, former Google executive, and three-time startup founder. Tej, welcome to Launch Pod.
Susan, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
We're excited to have you. What a background. You have a lot of experience. Tell us more about what you're doing right now.
Yeah, I've started a new company, very much in the space industry. It's in the crossroads of space and finance. And the story on how this started goes way back. I've been a space nut my whole life. I know the exact
You
moment.
say a space nut?
Space nut,
Oh.
like nuts about space. Space nut, that would be pretty cool.
That's
might
kind
have
of fun.
We might have just invented a term up.
Space nut.
I'm a space nut. We'll give you credit for that one if it becomes a
Okay.
thing. If it doesn't become a thing, you can blame me. But no, so I've been a space nut. I've been obsessed with space. I remember the exact moment. I was 3 years old. My parents took me to Kennedy Space Center, and I saw the launch pad and where they build the rockets, and I just knew that that's all I'm going to think about for the rest of my life. And many people have similar moments, whether it's the Apollo moon landing or the shuttle program, or maybe for the younger generation, the new SpaceX launches. There's some moment where many of us just have that realization like, wow, this is so much bigger than us, and there's some other connection here. That's been kind of like my personal connection with space. My career took a very different trajectory, which was around technology. I studied computer science in the 90s at Columbia, focused on artificial intelligence, computer vision, and streaming media. And graduating in 2000, streaming media was, perfectly timed. I worked at ESPN and Disney, built some of the first HD video networks online that, now have become Disney Plus and Hulu and things like that. And somewhere along that journey, I got the startup bug. I got bit by the startup bug, and I did 3 of my own startups, technology companies, nothing to do with space. And then about 10 years ago, and it's almost 10 years to the day, I know it because my son is about to be 10 years old, I had this realization that I no longer wanted to be a startup founder. I wanted to be a father. I wanted to be a husband. I wanted to be what I called normal and go and get a regular job. And I joined Citibank, particularly Citi Ventures, Citibank's investment arm, as an entrepreneur in residence. My skill set was not in finance at the time. It was in startups. So I was helping Citi identify new startups. And that's when I connected my passion with space and asked if I could start looking at the space ecosystem. And I started noticing there were several companies out there that were raising investment, new companies. And around that time, I started making some personal investments, including Axiom Space, including SpaceX and a few others. And I thought, great, this is how I will be part of the space industry. I then joined Google, and I was at Google for 4 years and kept my hands in the space ecosystem. And then about 5 years ago in 2021, joined the space industry. I joined my first investment, my portfolio company, Axiom Space, as chief revenue officer. And over those several years, I had the unbelievable fortune. The 3-year-old kid would not even imagine this could be reality, but I sent 4 missions to the International Space Station. 16 seats, so 4 seats per mission, 12 sovereign astronauts from different countries, many first astronauts from their countries to go up, several other firsts, the first cloud computer, the first digital assistant, the first wearables, the first champagne bottle, the first Build-A-Bear, the first diabetic pen, the first cancer drug that was approved for human clinical research trials on Earth. And this all in a matter of, 4 years. And in that time, I was promoted to CEO of the company. So again, in just a very short period of time, the last half decade, I went from being a complete outsider to driving billions of revenue into the company. And I learned quite a few things, particularly around this crossroads of space and finance, geopolitics and finance, and see a massive opportunity right now in the space industry, particularly as we're going through major inflection points and a large economy is coming, building the financial infrastructure, the underlying rails, the invisible infrastructure. If launch is the equivalent of the railroads going west, except they're going up, think of all the financial infrastructure that was created to enable everything else that happened. And that's the area that I want to focus on.
Especially because it's not just governments that are funding and in controlling everything. It's very commercial now.
Yes, it's interesting. It's still very much, if you follow the dollars, though, the source is governments, but the key is governments. There's this myth in space that there's a single buyer. And in the United States, that's NASA or the US government, and that's correct. And if you look at it in the broader sense, it is the governments for now. There is a commercial sector that's growing, but majority of the funds is governments. So the way to look at it is all the spend that will happen this year in 2026 is across all these government budgets where the money's already been allocated. So you've got this massive market of money that will be spent. It'll be spent with commercial providers of that infrastructure, commercial suppliers. So it's this epic moment where you get the government side and the commercial side in a public-private partnership, whether it's intended or natural, that is really going to change the industry over the next 5-10 years. And then I think what happens in that, you know, those examples I gave of the cloud computer, the wearable, the champagne bottle, the pharmaceutical research, you hear a lot about orbital data centers, it will become very commercial. So now is the time to really invest time, energy, money into the space sector.
Yeah, it's not going anywhere. It's only getting more and more popular. I mean, we've had the Artemis 2, and that's surged in public opinion. You know, it's all over the news. So yeah, it's not going anywhere, and we have to be prepared for what's next. You know, you talked about when you were 3 years old, and I know that was your aha moment. Do you have another aha moment you'd like to share?
I do. You know, I'll give you a personal one, and then I'll give you an industry one. So obviously the 3-year-old moment, that is, you know, probably the first aha moment I had in my life. And it was a defining moment. And it was a realization moment. Again, I was only 3, so what could I really, you know, have comprehended? But it was physical, it was visceral, it was, you know, outside of me that had that moment. I had a second moment due to space over 40 years later. You know, as CEO of Axiom Space, I had the privilege to send our 4th mission to the International Space Station. Obviously, I worked on the first 3 as well. But at this point, you know, leading the company and sending 4 astronauts up, their lives were my responsibility. So it was a different type of connection, a different type of pressure on me that was obviously business related, but very personal for me. And when those astronauts came home, when they landed on Earth, when I greeted them, when they came back, seeing their feet on the ground, seeing them back, I felt like I fulfilled a purpose, a personal purpose, a professional purpose, but it almost felt from a purpose standpoint. Now I'm just playing with house money, meaning whatever I do next from here, I've accomplished what I was supposed to do. Now I can build off that. So that aha moment really was almost a liberation. Not that everything I did to get to that moment, I wasn't free. It was obviously very much tied to my beliefs and my passion and my skill set. But now it was like, okay, I've elevated and I can go to this next level. That's the personal aha moment. The professional aha moment came late last year when I started looking at the industry. And to your point, it's not going away. It's only getting bigger. And I don't even pretend to be smart. I know I'm not. Other people might think I am, but I'm a hustler. I work hard. I know that the secret to everything in life is practice. If you really want something, you can get it, not because you have some innate talent or you're special. It's because you work your ass off to get it. And then everyone will say you're special or lucky or, you know, an innate talent for it. But when I look at the space industry, and obviously having been very deep in it and being one of the only people, maybe the only person to generate that kind of revenue from sending sovereign astronauts to space commercially, yes, I have an understanding and a learning. But even then, when I look at the next 10 years, it's very difficult for me to predict what will happen. Some futurists and some business people and some investors are very good at predicting, where to invest. What I know is it's going to be big. And while that sounds like a very trite realization, the aha moment to me was, well, if it's going to be big, the key to winning this game is being in the game. Everything else is secondary. So be in the game and build a business or create value for the world that grows as the market grows. So if you can build fundamental infrastructure that's necessary, so as the space industry keeps getting bigger, people need the value you're adding, you're set, right? That's like early days of the internet, right? Early days of mobile,
Right.
early days of AI. Like it's just gonna, you're gonna keep growing with it. So as I thought about where I can add that value, I'm not building rockets, right? That's not, I'm not a rocket scientist in that sense. There are many people who can do that who are very well equipped, but launch, for example, is a fundamental infrastructure layer of the space industry. Without launch, we're not getting up there. So launch is going to keep growing. So I started thinking, what's the next most important? And there's a few, but I do think financial infrastructure, enabling entrepreneurs, capital markets, governments to participate meaningfully in the industry. I think that's probably the second most important infrastructure layer. Then there's things like power, data, physical hardware to be built in space. I think those are kind of like the fundamental layers. So for me, the thought process was, as much as I love data and other things like that, the financial layer is the opportunity for me to have the most impact.
So this has to do with your startup that's coming.
Correct.
It's exciting. So you still got it under lock and key?
Yeah, we're what you'd call in the startup industry is stealth mode. It's not so much stealth mode because it's a secret. One thing I've learned through my career, but also in these transformational moments, is it's all about sharing and adding as much value. Yes, I probably have some trade secrets, or there's things that I know that others don't, but even if I told it to everyone, doesn't mean they could execute on it. So I think it's got to be an abundance mindset. We're in stealth because of branding and go-to-market strategy. This timing of the industry is so wonderful, and we were able to get great investors to back the company very quickly, pulled together an incredible team. But how we actually present this to the world, I want to be extremely thoughtful and intentional about. So by the time this podcast airs, the new brand will probably be out. But, when we're recording this, the reason I'm not saying anything is because we're still technically in stealth mode.
All right. What has been one of your biggest challenges during this journey, and how did you overcome it?
Yeah, so I'll speak very specifically about space. I talked a little bit before about my belief on what it takes to get what you want or get anything that we want in this world. And it's never easy. It's hard. It's supposed to be hard. So, when it came to space, there was no doubt for me that I was going to figure it out. I have overcome those challenges in my life and my career, whether that be imposter syndrome or building a growth mindset or accepting my fears and naming them and leaning into them. These are all things I learned before I got to the space industry. So I didn't have any worry that joining the space industry as an outsider 5 years ago, that I would have any major challenges. In fact, it was the opposite. As an outsider, I think I proved that outsiders had outsized impact on the space industry. And I welcome anybody who's watching, who's been dreaming about space, but has had that mental block where, hey, I'm not a rocket scientist, I'm not a billionaire, what am I going to do in space? Forget that. We need all perspectives. This is a civilization-wide inflection point for humanity. So we need everybody thinking about this. But what I learned is with this entrepreneurial mindset, coming into an industry where they haven't seen anyone like me, they can't imagine what value someone like me could bring to create so much value. I'm not, and this is not a testament to me, it's a testament to where the industry is and how hungry it is for innovation.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the biggest challenges for me was it's not as simple as, okay, I'm an outsider, I'm a workhorse, and I will get this done. There is a legacy, a 60 plus year legacy in the space industry of culture, norms, policy, politics, a way that an industry works that is not normal. And you could say this for other industries. You could say this for government. You could say this for finance. You could say this for biotech. But the biggest challenge for me was adapting and still being myself, being authentic to my belief, but playing by the rules of a community, of a society, of an industry. And that still proves to be a challenge for me. Obviously, I ascended from 3-year-old space nut to 43-year-old angel investor to 47-year-old CEO. And in the last couple of years, that ascension was, pretty exponential. But even at those highest levels in the industry, there was always this outsider-insider tension. And for me, the way I got over it is it's not about being an outsider or being an insider. It's about the tension itself. From that tension comes the creative opportunities, the innovations, the new inventions. So really balancing that outsider-insider tension, balancing it in the industry, balancing it in the company, and balancing it in myself were all a challenge, and they still continue to be a challenge.
It is, this is a frontier. I think we're still making the rules as we go because we haven't accomplished it all yet.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think this is the beauty of it. We get to write the playbook. There is no playbook. And anyone who tells you there's a playbook is lying, or they're lying to themselves,
True.
because they believe it's certain. Like, people often ask me, first of all, it's an amazing time for us to be doing this discussion, right? We have 4 astronauts, a very diverse crew, being farther away from the planet than we've ever been. It's just an incredible time.
It's amazing. It is.
It begs the question, why did it take 50 years? And, people say, why haven't we been back to the moon? It's been 50 years. I have a very simple answer, because we chose not to. Everything else is an excuse. We as a society, we have the will, we have the means to do whatever we want. And I think finally we're getting our act together, and it's a combination of government and commercial. Yeah. But I feel like we have to accept where we are as a civilization. That doesn't mean we don't have several problems on Earth that we still have to solve. But we've evolved to a civilization where the problem is not money. There's more than enough capital to go around.
Tej, I want to bring up the Challenger because that had an impact on me. And that I felt personally like, oh my gosh, we got to put the brakes on. This can't happen again. And I think a lot of people felt that way.
Yeah, it's interesting. I have a very strong connection with the Challenger as well, and I'll share my story in a second. What's interesting, though, is you could have asked the same question at the Challenger time. Why haven't we been back to the moon? And if anything, post-Challenger, with the exception of 2011 to 2021, I'll explain what happened there, there actually has been an acceleration. We're not to the moon. This is kind of new, but if you think about it, because of SpaceX, I'll say thanks to SpaceX, we're almost at a launch per day, right? Think about the shuttle and how it would go up and how it would land and how few times it went, relatively speaking, to a SpaceX Falcon, right? Or hopefully soon Starship. So there has been acceleration. What's interesting about Challenger, I'll give you kind of like I want to acknowledge exactly what you said about pumping the brakes. There is both a policy reason to do that and also a philosophical reason not to do it. And again, this comes down to both are correct. We're talking about human life. We're talking about people sitting on top of missiles, it's highly dangerous, and going to an environment that is literally the most brutal environment known to mankind for humans to live in. And yet we still want to go. So there's something innate in us that tells us, despite all the danger, we need to go. From a policy and a engineering and an operations standpoint, yes, absolutely, we have to make sure those mistakes do not happen. And if you look at SpaceX as a vehicle and as success rate of sending humans off, it's phenomenal. Now, what's interesting is it was in 1985. I was 7, or maybe 86. I was 8. I was in second grade. And I remember they rolled in the TV, into public school in New York. It was on that great thing, the old school TV. And I think this was true all over the United States. And I even remember my teachers' faces, right? Like, how do you explain this to young children? And there was a teacher on the mission. It was a devastating day for America, for the world.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I remember, though, personally, and I can actually physically feel it, in that sadness was a admiration for those people. Like they were heroes. They gave their lives to move us forward. And as scary as it was almost, and I'm talking like what an 8-year-old kid would feel. Who knows, what I would say now at this age. But it was almost like, no, this is exactly the time we lean in. Doesn't mean we rush and do other weird things, but if we didn't actually accelerate the time, then they would have given their lives in vain.
Right. It would be the best way to honor their memory is to meet the challenge and overcome and make it better next time.
Yeah.
Yeah. What piece of advice would you like to share with our listeners?
There's several, because we're on the topic and we're speaking about space and we're talking about a lot of like these childhood memories and moments that drive many of us. Often, and I'll speak about myself here, I live in my head. And the stories are beautiful ways to keep cohesion. There was that 3-year-old kid who then made his way to be CEO of a major space company and starting now something that I believe will be transformation for civilization. Awesome story. If I actually bring it back to that moment when I was 3 years old, it had nothing to do with my brain. There was just something inside me that aligned. And I don't know if it aligned with the wiring in me or aligned with something greater, something in the universe. I don't know. But all I do know is that everything was aligned. And when it comes to space, I'm sure for others, they feel this in other areas. They might feel it when it comes to their own faith, or they might feel it when it comes to their family or their passion or their sport or their music. For me, space is that. And I have spent the last 5 years speaking to thousands, tens of thousands of people in large audiences, one-on-ones, world leaders, astronauts. And I feel for many of us, there is this underlying knowing that we need to explore the cosmos. There's not a real rational answer why. The answer is because. And that's a good enough answer, and that motivates so many of us. So the advice I'd like to give on a very philosophical level is when you're thinking about your why, for whatever that is, get out of your head. Maybe be in your body. That sometimes gives you a signal, but there's something deeper. There's something. Some people might call it a calling. Some people might call it purpose, whatever it is. I think, listen to that thing bigger than you on a very practical level. Whatever that thing is, or even if that thing doesn't exist, I do actually believe passion and purpose are overrated. I think in life, when you look at the greats, the people that have really pushed society forward, look at how much work they put into it. I would say practice beats purpose or passion every single day. I don't care how excited you are, how much you love something, if you don't put in the hard work. So really, at the end of the day, if you know what you want and you have a strong enough reason why you want it, it's really up to you to put all the work you can possibly put in to get it.
Great advice. Tej, it seems like everything that you have been through, from that 3-year-old boy to everywhere you've worked, all the different things that you've done in becoming a father, all of these things have set you up for this moment right now. It's prepared you for this.
Yeah, I'll tell you a little bit of a personal story about this. When I left my last startup, like I said, it was a couple of weeks before my son was born. I said to my friends, but I also publicly said this, I would never be a startup founder again. 10 years later, I've proven myself wrong. I'm doing it again. But I was that adamant that, that chapter of my life was over. And now I want to apply my skills and my abilities to larger teams where I can have more impact with larger platforms. When it comes to doing this company, I didn't have an intention to start it. So where my other startups were, I want to start a company, that wasn't my goal here. What ended up happening is it's the right time for this idea, and I'm the right person to do it. So, to your point of this culminating factor, that's the truth for all of us. Sometimes it aligns, sometimes it doesn't. But I think everything we're seeing in the industry and the good fortune I've had to experience it over the last 5 years, which only existed because of the previous years, previous decades, and that off chance that my parents stopped at Kennedy Space Center on the way to Disney World. In hindsight, the dots all connect very nicely.
Well, it's an exciting time, and a lot of exciting things are coming from you very soon, and we can't wait to hear more. I hope that once you make the big announcement and things start to unfold, I'd love to have you back on LaunchPod if you would.
Oh, I'd love to.
But before we wrap up, I want to ask, do you have a passion project, either past or present, that you'd like to share?
It's interesting. My passion project has always been space. Like, if I think about it, up until 5 years ago, space was a thing for daydreams. It was a thing for me to research. It wasn't till after my son was born and I was at Citibank that I started connecting the two. And actually, up until that point, I almost felt guilty about daydreaming. Like, it was distracting me from what I had to do. And once I aligned them, kind of things became clear. For me now, what I would say is space has gone from being a passion project to being my profession. So if I look at outside of my profession, what are my passions? Interestingly enough, I would say startups are one of them. Not necessarily the fact that I'm starting a company, but sharing the knowledge that I gained from going through it. So, I love working with startups. There's this nonprofit that I work with called the Startup Leadership Program. I went through that program with my first startup. I like to mentor startup founders. So I definitely say that is one area for me, coaching entrepreneurs, because I think they really move society forward. And then the second is my family. My son is going to be 10 years old. My wife was extremely supportive during my startup years, probably doubly supportive during the first half of my space career, I'd say. And now spending time with them and just enjoying this moment with my family, with my parents, with my wife's parents, with our siblings, our friends, our community, I'd say anytime I can get to appreciate that, I will take.
They say if you do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life. So I think you really love what you do.
Yeah, thank you.
It shows. All right. Tej, thank you so much for joining us today. And I look forward to our next visit. And I can't wait to hear all the exciting things coming down the pipe.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
All right. Make sure you join us where we connect, collaborate, and accelerate. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review and subscribe. Until next time, keep looking up.
Don't miss an episode. Subscribe on your favorite streaming platform. Watch us on YouTube and follow us on social media. Stars LaunchPod, propelling us forward, one launch at a time.